Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book review. Today, I am going to be covering this book, Traplines. It is written by a John Rember. The subtitle is Coming Home to Sawtooth Valley. This book, Traplines, is about melancholy in a way, a reminiscent melancholy, almost nostalgia. Its its author, John Rember, grew up in Sawtooth Valley, Idaho, and his father at the time was a salmon fishing guide, a trapper. They lived on a small 70-acre farm, and his father guided people along the river in their backyard for $10 a day for fishing, so that they would catch a salmon on a line and reel it in. He was in this environment growing up. He had a small school in town that he learned in. He wasn't a full-timer in that town. I think they had a winter home elsewhere that was less snowed in, which apparently is an issue they have. I've never lived anywhere where you could be really snowed in like that, so I can't really relate to it, but he paints a very pretty picture of it. The back cover continues. Everyone in his family hunted, including his mother, and every kill they made became dinner. But upon his return, he discovers that thousands of salmon have been slaughtered by hydroelectric dams, power lines riddle the landscape, and hunting for food has become a thing of the past. Rember explores what needs to be preserved in the American landscape. In Traplines, he tells a vital story of the American West, how it was domesticated, and the attempts of those who live there now to maintain the illusion of its rusticity. Traplines is about change. It examines home like Red House does, but he feels like he belongs, unlike the author in Red House. It's written in a style akin to Wild to the Heart, akin to that style of outdoor writing, the very humorous but anecdotal style. It's a memoir, and it's a nature book. So those kind of run hand in hand. It probably has influences, a lot of the same influences as some of the other books I've read and shared here. John Rember, he left his home valley, his home state, for some years, and when he finally came back, he recognized some of it, but he didn't recognize all of it. The part of Maryland I grew up in, the forests are great, but there's no hills to look at. The swamps are kind of dismal to be in. There's mosquitoes and bees all over the place. It's not a fun place to be, but even the parts of the home that I grew up in have changed. Stores have come and gone. Roads have been built up. Forests have been torn down and replaced with suburbs. And that's just a suburb of the nation's capital. When you look at Sawtooth Valley surrounded by the Rocky Mountains, green and snow-covered mountains in the distance, rivers that were undammed, and in your turn the salmon are gone because the dam interferes with their travels. It's disheartening to some extent. This book is about 220 pages long, and it alternates between reminiscent stories of growing up and italicized tales, I guess, of modern, well, then it was modern. Nowadays it's really not. This is like 30 years old by now. If he were still living in Sawtooth Valley, if he were still writing of Sawtooth Valley, I'm sure he would discuss even further changes. But from the difference of the 50s and 60s when he grew up to the late 80s, early 90s, there were some noticeable changes. There's one of these sections I think really describes the tone of his reminiscing pretty well. I'm going to read portions of it. 15 miles west of Stanley, Idaho, just after Highway 21 crosses Thatcher Creek, is a logworm fence that is past its prime. The once regular zigzag of its line is broken by skewed and decayed top logs and by the hasty repairs of people more interested in keeping cattle pastured than fences aesthetic. Its panels sag, and the short base logs under the zigs and the zags have rotted and sunk deep into the meadow. It was constructed at a price of $6.30 per panel, begun and finished in the summer of 1964. I know this because I helped build it. My father had the contract for it the summer I was 13 years old, and I got put to work doing whatever a 13-year-old could do on a fence job. It is sobering to watch the work of my own hands fade in the sun, sag in the middle, rot, and fall apart. I drive by the old fence on my way to Boise or Kirkham Hot Springs, and it is always a shock to see it. The fence in my memory is in better shape. It would be good to think that what hasn't decayed is the knowledge of how to live in the here and now, but that knowledge too has faded with the years. I have trouble paying attention during the thin moments of the present. I'm no wiser than anyone else who has signed a 30-year mortgage or spent a decade or two mourning what might have been. Now and then I yearn for adulthood. And in the present, I drive past a fence and remember its once living trees and see that hard work does come to an end. I see the creep of new lodgepole saplings from the fence line towards the frost-cracked road, and know that what has come from the earth will return to the earth, if it's given time. He only wrote this when he was like 45, 50 years old, so that mentality seems kind of morbid for someone that's only halfway through life, 2/3 of the way through life, but it's the kind of nostalgia I like reading in these memoirs. Someone grew up in one space, and they return to it, and it's different. I think we can all relate to that. All of us who have grown to adulthood and moved away from home and returned to home sometime later. It's sobering, as he put it. And I think it's a good way to put it. It's sobering to see that. The rest of the book discusses some various stories about the town. Apparently, like a bar, once the old bar had closed, there was a ever-rotating set of bar owners that tried to set up a bar in that town, and it never succeeded. Traplines is about a rural boy who left home and returns a Renaissance man dismayed by some of the changes to his home. I bought this book for $4. On the back it says it's $13 US, $18 Canada. This book is dedicated to his mother and father and has lovely stories of rural life in the middle of the 20th century. I like this book, and even though I think a lot of you would enjoy it, there is some universality to what is being written about in this book, but it may not be for everyone. I love memoirs. I love the thrill of getting into someone's head, and that's why I love this book. I think you should buy it if you're into memoirs. My name is Wildstag. Thank you for tuning in to another used book review.